The town had no name worth remembering, just a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the wind, as if seeking warmth from one another. The church sat at the edge of the main road, its white paint peeling like old skin, its steeple crooked, leaning slightly to the left as though burdened by too many prayers. Eleanor James stood outside, clutching a black shawl around her shoulders. The fabric was thin, borrowed from a woman she'd never met. Her own coat had been lost somewhere between the train station and the boarding house. She didn't care enough to look for it. The wind pushed against her back, urging her forward. She hesitated. The wooden doors were open, and inside the low hum of voices drifted out like smoke. A funeral. Her brother's funeral. Or so she thought. She stepped inside. The air smelled of candle wax and damp wood. Rows of wooden pews stretched before her, filled with faces she didn't recognize. No one turned to look at her. No one nodded in greeting. She was a stranger here, invisible in her grief. Nora walked slowly down the aisle, her boots making soft sounds against the floor. She found a seat near the back, slid into the pew and folded her hands in her lap. Her eyes drifted to the front of the church. A simple wooden casket rested on a low platform draped with a faded quilt. Flowers surrounded it, wild and uneven, picked from the fields rather than bought from a shop. Beside the casket stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his head bowed. His hat was in his hands, turning slowly between his fingers. Nora felt something tighten in her chest. Grief had a way of recognizing itself. The preacher spoke in a voice that seemed too loud for the small space. Words about dust and ashes, about eternal rest and heavenly peace. Nora barely heard them. She was too busy watching the man at the front. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders rigid. He didn't cry, but she could see the tremor in his hands. When the service ended, people began to file out. Slow, shuffling steps, murmured condolences. The man remained where he was, standing beside the casket like a sentinel. Nora stood. She should leave. She should find the right church, the right funeral. But her feet didn't move. Instead, she walked forward. She didn't know why. The man looked up as she approached. His eyes were dark, shadowed by exhaustion and something deeper. He didn't speak. Neither did she. They stood in silence, two strangers bound by the weight of loss. Finally, Nora whispered, "I'm sorry." The man nodded once. "Thank you." His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. It matched the lines carved into his face, the gray at his temples, the calluses on his hands. Nora hesitated, then added, "Did you know them well?" The man's gaze shifted to the casket. "My brother." Nora's breath caught. "Mine too." The lie slipped out before she could stop it. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe in this moment, in this strange church with this strange man, it felt true. He looked at her again, and for the first time something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. "You're not from here," he said. "No." Neither was he. The man glanced back at the casket. "He came here looking for work. Stayed longer than he should have." Nora didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between them, heavy and hollow. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The remaining mourners had left. The preacher was gathering his things near the altar. It was just the two of them now. The man turned to leave, then paused. "What was his name?" he asked. "Your brother?" Nora's throat tightened. "Thomas." The man nodded slowly. "Mine was Samuel." He walked past her, his footsteps echoing in the empty church. Nora stood there frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She should tell him. She should explain, but the words wouldn't come. By the time she turned around, he was gone. She stepped outside into the fading light. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the dusty road. The man was walking away, his figure growing smaller with each step. Nora called out without thinking, "Wait." He stopped, turned. She didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt honest. "I didn't mean to intrude." The man studied her for a long moment, then he shook his head. "You didn't." He tipped his hat, a gesture that felt both formal and tender. Then he walked away, disappearing around the corner of a low building. Nora stood in the middle of the road, the wind tugging at her shawl. She had come to this town to bury her brother. Instead, she had stumbled into someone else's grief, and somehow it had felt more real than anything she'd experienced in months. The boarding house was small, barely more than a shack with a crooked sign. The woman who ran it was kind but distant, handing Nora a key without asking questions. Nora climbed the narrow stairs to her room, a cramped space with a single bed and a window that didn't quite close. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The funeral had been wrong. The church had been wrong. Everything about today had been a mistake. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the man standing beside the casket. The way his hands had shaken, the way he had looked at her, as though he understood something she hadn't yet spoken. She pulled a folded letter from her pocket, her brother's last words written in a shaky hand. She had read it so many times the paper was soft, the ink smudged, but she read it again. Nora, forgive me. I couldn't carry it anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Outside, the night settled over the town, quiet and cold. Somewhere in the darkness, a man named Caleb Turner sat alone in a small house on the edge of the plains, staring at the empty chair across from him. Neither of them slept that night. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of rain. It drummed against the roof, steady and relentless. She dressed slowly, her movements automatic. She needed to leave, find the right church, bury her brother properly. But when she stepped outside, she saw him. Caleb Turner stood across the street, leaning against a post, his hat pulled low against the rain. He looked up when she appeared, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he crossed the street. "You're still here," he said. Nora nodded. "I am." He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "Rain's not stopping anytime soon." "No." Another silence. Then quietly he asked, "Would you like some coffee?" Nora hesitated. She should say no. She should leave. But instead she heard herself say, "Yes." They walked together through the rain, side by side, two strangers who had shared a moment of grief and couldn't seem to let it go. Maybe, Nora thought, some mistakes were meant to happen. The coffee shop was little more than a counter and 4 tables crammed into the front room of someone's house. The woman behind the counter looked up when they entered, her eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Nora, then softening when she recognized Caleb. "Morning, Caleb," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "Morning, Mrs. Holt." They sat at a table near the window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the world outside into shapes and shadows. Mrs. Holt brought 2 cups without being asked, setting them down with a quiet clink. Nora wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep into her cold fingers. She didn't drink right away, just held it. Caleb sat across from her, his own cup untouched. He looked tired, more than tired, hollowed out. "You didn't sleep," Nora said. He glanced up. "Neither did you." She smiled faintly. "No." For a while they sat in silence. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm. A few people hurried past, heads down, collars up. The town was waking slowly, reluctantly. Finally Caleb spoke. "You said your brother's name was Thomas." Nora's chest tightened. "Yes." "When did he pass?" She looked down at her coffee. 3 weeks ago." Caleb nodded slowly. "Mine was 2 days ago." The weight of those words settled between them. 2 days. The wound was still fresh, still bleeding. "I'm sorry," Nora whispered. "So am I." Another silence. Then Caleb leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the window. "Samuel came here 5 years ago. Said he wanted to start over. He'd been in the war, came back different." Nora understood. She'd seen it before. Men who returned with their bodies intact but their souls fractured. "He worked at the mill," Caleb continued. "Kept to himself mostly. I came out here to check on him. Found him 3 days ago. He'd been dead for a week." Nora's breath caught. "Alone?" Caleb nodded. "No one knew, no one checked." The bitterness in his voice was sharp, cutting. Nora didn't try to soften it. She knew grief didn't need comfort. It needed witness. "Thomas hung himself," she said quietly. Caleb's eyes snapped to hers. "In the barn," she continued. "I found him." The words felt like stones dropping into deep water. Heavy, final. Caleb reached across the table. His hand didn't touch hers, but it rested close, near enough that she could feel its warmth. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. Nora nodded, unable to speak. They sat like that for a long moment. 2 people who had lost something irreplaceable, trying to make sense of a world that kept turning anyway. Eventually, Mrs. Holt came over to refill their cups. She glanced between them, her expression unreadable, then walked away without a word. Caleb cleared his throat. "Where are you staying?" "The boarding house, Mrs. Fletcher's place." He nodded. It's not much. It's enough. For how long? Nora hesitated. I don't know. I came here to find the church where Thomas wanted to be buried. But I went to the wrong one yesterday. Caleb's brow furrowed. Wrong one? I got off at the wrong stop. The station master told me St. Michael's was down the road. I thought he meant the one on Hill Street. That's St. Mary's. I know that now. A flicker of something passed across Caleb's face. Not quite a smile, but close. So yesterday, he said slowly, you were at my brother's funeral by mistake. Nora nodded. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. The firmness in his voice surprised her. She looked up, met his gaze. You were the only person who cried, he said quietly. The only one. Nora's throat tightened. I thought it was Thomas. I know, but it didn't matter. Someone mourned him. That's more than he had before. The rain began to ease, thinning into a soft drizzle. The light through the window shifted, pale and uncertain. Caleb stood. Come on. Where? I'll show you. They walked through the wet streets, their boots squelching in the mud. The town was small, barely more than a main road with a few side streets branching off. Most of the buildings were weathered, their paint faded, their signs crooked. Caleb led her past the general store, past the saloon with its swinging doors, past a row of houses that all looked the same. Finally they stopped in front of a small church, smaller than St. Mary's, simpler. St. Michael's, Caleb said. Nora stared at it. The building was plain, almost humble. No steeple, no stained glass, just 4 walls and a cross above the door. This is where Thomas wanted to be buried. Caleb nodded. The cemetery's out back. They walked around the side of the church. The graveyard was small, enclosed by a low stone wall. Headstones leaned at odd angles, some so old the names had worn away. Wildflowers grew between the graves, bright and defiant. Nora stopped at the edge of the cemetery. Her eyes scanned the rows, looking for something familiar. But there was nothing. No fresh grave, no new marker. He's not here, she said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, where is he? Nora turned to face him. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. She'd been carrying it for days, and it had grown heavier with each passing hour. I don't know, she admitted. He left a letter, said he wanted to be buried here, in this town, but he didn't say why, and I came here to find out. Caleb studied her, his expression unreadable. You came all this way for a dead man's wish. He was my brother. Most people wouldn't bother. Nora's jaw tightened. I'm not most people. For the first time, Caleb smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. No, he said, you're not. They stood in the graveyard surrounded by the dead, and for a strange, fragile moment, Nora felt less alone. That afternoon, Caleb took her to the town records office. It was a cramped room above the post office, filled with dusty ledgers and boxes of yellowed papers. The clerk, an old man with thick spectacles, looked up when they entered. Help you? He asked. We're looking for a burial record, Caleb said. Name's Thomas James. The clerk shuffled through a stack of papers, muttering to himself. After a few minutes he shook his head. No record of that name. Nora's heart sank. Are you sure? Checked 3 times, ma'am. No Thomas James buried in this county. She looked at Caleb, desperation creeping into her voice. Then where is he? Caleb thanked the clerk, then led her back outside. They stood on the wooden walkway, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds. Maybe he's not here yet, Caleb said gently. Nora shook her head. He died 3 weeks ago. Someone should have. She stopped. A horrible thought crept into her mind. What if no one claimed him? Caleb's expression darkened. Then he'd be in a potter's field, unmarked. The words hit her like a blow. Her brother, who had fought in the war, who had come home broken but alive, buried in an unmarked grave like a pauper. I have to find him, she said, her voice shaking. Caleb nodded. We will. We? He looked at her, his gaze steady. You helped me bury my brother yesterday. Even if you didn't know it, let me help you find yours. Nora wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need help, but the truth was she did, and for reasons she didn't fully understand, she trusted this man. Thank you, she whispered. As they walked back toward the boarding house, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The town, so gray and lifeless in the rain, seemed softer now, almost beautiful. Caleb stopped at the edge of the road. "I'll ask around tomorrow, see if anyone knows anything." Nora nodded. "I appreciate it." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Miss James." "Nora," she said. "Call me Nora." He hesitated, then nodded. "Caleb." They stood there for a moment, neither moving. Then Caleb turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller against the fading light. Nora watched him go, her heart heavy but somehow lighter than before. Maybe coming to the wrong funeral had been the right mistake after all. 3 days passed before they found anything. Caleb came to the boarding house early, his face grim. Nora met him on the porch, already dressed, her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. "I found something," he said. Her heart jumped. "Where?" "The old cemetery, past the edge of town. It's where they bury the ones nobody claims." Nora's stomach twisted. "Take me there." They walked in silence. The town was still waking, smoke rising from chimneys, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery. But Nora noticed none of it. Her mind was fixed on one thing. Thomas. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking a dry creek bed. No stone wall marked its borders. No gate welcomed visitors. Just rows of wooden crosses, most of them crooked, some fallen over completely. Caleb stopped at the edge. "The caretaker keeps a record. He said a man matching Thomas's description was buried here 2 weeks ago." Nora stepped forward, her eyes scanning the graves. "Which one?" Caleb pointed to a spot near the back, a simple wooden cross, no name carved into it, just a date. Nora walked toward it slowly, her legs trembling. When she reached the grave, she dropped to her knees. The earth was still loose, not yet settled. "Thomas," she whispered. The wind stirred around her, cold and sharp. She pressed her hand to the ground as if she could reach through the dirt and touch him one last time. Caleb stood a few feet away, giving her space. He didn't speak, didn't intrude, just stayed close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. After a long while, Nora stood. Her face was wet with tears, but her voice was steady. "He deserves a marker," she said. "A real one, with his name." Caleb nodded. "I'll help you." That afternoon they went to the carpenter's shop. The man behind the counter listened as Nora explained what she needed. He quoted a price. She reached into her pocket and counted out the coins. It was nearly everything she had left. But it was worth it. The marker would be ready in 3 days. As they left the shop, Caleb glanced at her. "You're running out of money." Nora didn't deny it. "I'll manage." "How long can you stay?" "As long as I need to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's a woman in town who needs help at the boarding house. Cooking, cleaning. It doesn't pay much, but it's something." Nora stopped walking. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering you a reason to stay." She looked at him, searching his face. "Why?" Caleb hesitated. Then quietly he said, "Because I don't want you to leave yet." The words hung between them, fragile and honest. Nora's chest tightened. She should leave. Should go back home. But the truth was, she didn't want to. Not yet. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." The work at the boarding house was hard but simple. Nora spent her days scrubbing floors, washing linens, preparing meals. Mrs. Fletcher was kind but kept her distance, as did most of the other women in town. They whispered when Nora passed. She heard the rumors. A young woman alone, spending time with a man who wasn't her husband. It wasn't proper. It wasn't right. But Nora didn't care. Every evening after her work was done, Caleb would come by. Sometimes they walked to the cemetery. Sometimes they sat on the porch and talked. He told her about Samuel, about the war, about the nightmares that never stopped. She told him about Thomas, about the way he used to laugh before the war, about the way he'd changed after, about the guilt she carried for not seeing the signs. "I should have known," she said one night, her voice breaking. "I should have stopped him." Caleb shook his head. "You couldn't have." "How do you know?" "Because I tried to stop Samuel. Every day for 5 years, and it didn't matter." Nora looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "Then what was the point?" Caleb reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "The point," he said quietly, "is that we tried, and we're still here." She held on to his hand like a lifeline. One night, a man came to the boarding house. He was drunk, loud, banging on the door. Mrs. Fletcher refused to let him in, but he wouldn't leave. Nora heard the commotion from her room. She came downstairs just as the man shoved past Mrs. Fletcher and stumbled into the hallway. "Where's the girl?" he slurred. "The one who's been sniffing around Caleb Turner." Nora stepped forward. "I'm right here." The man sneered. "You think you're something special? You think he's gonna marry you? That's none of your business. It is my business. Caleb owes me money, and if he's spending it on you—" The door swung open. Caleb stepped inside, his face dark with anger. "Get out, Harris." The man turned, swaying. "You gonna make me?" Caleb didn't answer. He just grabbed the man by the collar and dragged him outside. There was a scuffle, the sound of fists hitting flesh. Then silence. Caleb came back inside, his knuckles bloody, his jaw set. Nora rushed to him. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. You didn't have to do that." He looked at her, his eyes fierce. "Yes, I did." The next morning Nora went to the cemetery alone. The marker had been delivered. Thomas's name was carved into the wood, simple and clear. She knelt beside the grave and whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't there, but I'm here now." The wind answered, soft and low. When she returned to town, Caleb was waiting for her. "I need to tell you something," he said. Nora's heart sank. "What?" "My family. They're coming to town. They want me to go back east with them." "Are you going?" Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Not if you ask me to stay." Nora stood frozen, Caleb's words echoing in her mind. "Not if you ask me to stay." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The words tangled in her throat, caught between fear and hope. Caleb waited. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Finally Nora whispered, "I can't ask you that." His face didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed. "Why not?" "Because I'm leaving too." The words felt like stones falling from her lips. Heavy. Final. Caleb took a step back. "When?" "Tomorrow. The train leaves at dawn." "Why didn't you tell me?" Nora looked away, her hands trembling. "Because I didn't know how." The truth was more complicated than that. She'd been thinking about leaving for days. Every time she passed the cemetery, every time she saw Thomas's marker, she felt the pull of home, of the life she'd left behind. But every time she saw Caleb, she felt something else, something that terrified her. "I buried my brother," she said quietly. "That's what I came here to do, and now it's done." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Is that all this was to you? A task to finish?" "No, but I can't stay here forever, Caleb. This isn't my town. These aren't my people." "They could be." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Back home I have responsibilities. My mother is sick. My sister needs help with the farm. I can't just abandon them." "And what about what you need?" The question hit her like a fist. She looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "What I need doesn't matter." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low and rough. "It matters to me." Nora's breath caught. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to tell him everything she'd been holding back, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned and walked away. That night, Nora lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. The walls felt like they were closing in. Every sound seemed too loud: the creak of floorboards, the rustle of wind, the distant howl of a coyote. She thought about Caleb. About the way he'd looked at her, about the way her heart had twisted when she walked away. She'd told herself she was doing the right thing, but it didn't feel right. It felt like tearing something open that had just begun to heal. A knock at the door startled her. She sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "Who is it?" "It's me." Caleb's voice, low, tired. Nora opened the door. He stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands, his face shadowed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have pushed." "You didn't." "I did. And I shouldn't have. You have your own life, your own reasons for leaving. I had no right to ask you to give them up." Nora swallowed hard. "Caleb, let me finish." He took a breath. "When Samuel died, I thought that was it. I thought I'd used up all my chances at feeling anything real. And then you walked into that church, and for the first time in years I didn't feel so alone." Tears slipped down Nora's cheeks. "I felt it too." "Then why are you leaving?" "Because I'm scared." The confession broke something inside her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs. Caleb stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, her body shaking. "I'm scared too," he whispered. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim hallway. When Nora finally pulled back, her face was wet but her eyes were clear. "I don't know if I can stay," she said. "Then don't. Not for me, but stay for yourself. Just a little longer." She looked up at him. "What if my family needs me? Then we'll figure it out. Together." The words settled over her like a blanket. Together. She nodded slowly. "All right. A little longer." The next morning, Nora didn't get on the train. Instead, she walked to the telegraph office and sent a message home. Short, simple. Delayed. "Will write soon, love, Nora." When she stepped outside, Caleb was waiting. He smiled when he saw her, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "You stayed." "I did." They walked together through the town, past the church, past the cemetery, out toward the open plains. The sky was wide and endless, the color of faded denim. "Tell me about your family," Caleb said. Nora hesitated, then began to talk about her mother's illness, about her sister's stubbornness, about the farm that was falling apart without her. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You carry a lot." "So do you. Maybe that's why we understand each other." They stopped at the top of a hill overlooking the town. The wind tugged at Nora's skirt, lifting strands of hair from her face. "What happens now?" she asked. Caleb turned to her. "Now we take it one day at a time." "And your family? When they come?" "I'll tell them the truth, that I'm not leaving." "Not yet. They won't understand. I know, but I'm done living for other people's expectations." Nora reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, rough and warm. "So am I," she whispered. That evening a letter arrived for Caleb. It was from his mother, written in careful script. Nora watched as he read it, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he folded the letter and set it aside. "They're not coming," he said. Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" "They've disowned me. Said if I won't come home, I'm no longer part of the family." The words were flat, emotionless, but Nora could see the pain beneath them. "I'm sorry," she said. Caleb shook his head. "Don't be. I chose this." "Did you?" He looked at her. "Yes, and I'd choose it again." Later that night, Nora lay in bed, thinking about choices, about the things people gave up for love, about the things they held on to. She thought about Thomas, about the choices he'd made, about the pain he'd carried. And she thought about Caleb, about the way he'd stood beside her grave after grave, never asking for anything in return. Maybe, she thought, love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, about staying when it would be easier to leave, about choosing each other again and again, even when the world said no. The next morning, Nora found Caleb at the cemetery. He was standing beside Samuel's grave, his head bowed. She walked up beside him and slipped her hand into his. "I'm not leaving," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "What about your family?" "I'll send money. I'll write. But I'm staying here, with you." Caleb's throat worked. "Are you sure?" Nora nodded. For the first time in a long time, yes. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Above them, the sky stretched wide and blue, endless and unbroken. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Nora felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning of the funeral was clear and cold. Frost clung to the grass, sparkling in the pale sunlight. Nora stood at the edge of the cemetery, holding a single white flower. Beside her, Caleb carried a wooden cross he'd carved himself. Samuel's name was etched into the wood, neat and careful. They weren't alone. A handful of people had come. Mrs. Holt from the coffee shop, the old clerk from the records office, even Mrs. Fletcher, who stood at a respectful distance, her hands folded. Caleb placed the cross at the head of Samuel's grave. He stepped back, his jaw tight. Nora moved to Thomas's grave and laid the flower on the freshly turned earth. She knelt, her fingers brushing the marker. "I'm staying," she whispered. "I hope that's all right." The wind answered, soft and gentle. When she stood, Caleb was beside her. He took her hand without a word. The preacher spoke briefly. words about rest and peace and letting go. When he finished, people began to drift away, offering quiet condolences. Soon, only Nora and Caleb remained. "Do you think they're at peace?" Nora asked. Caleb looked at the graves. "I hope so. Do you think we ever will be?" He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Maybe, if we let ourselves." Nora nodded slowly. "Then let's try." They walked back to town together, their steps slow and unhurried. The world felt different now, lighter somehow. That afternoon they sat on the porch of the boarding house. The sun was warm, the air still. For the first time in weeks, Nora felt like she could breathe. "I wrote to my sister," she said. "Told her I wouldn't be coming home for a while." "What did you say?" "That I found something here, something worth staying for." Caleb smiled. "And if she asks you to come back?" Nora looked at him. "I'll tell her the truth, that I'm building a life here, with you." The words felt bold, terrifying, but also right. Caleb reached for her hand. "I don't have much to offer, just a small house, a life that's quiet and simple. That's all I want." He studied her face. "You're sure?" "I am." That evening they walked to the edge of town where Caleb's house stood. It was small, weathered but sturdy. Inside it smelled of wood smoke and coffee. "It's not much," Caleb said. Nora shook her head. "It's perfect." They stood in the doorway, the last light of day painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I never thought I'd feel this again," Caleb said quietly. "Hope." Nora leaned against him. "Neither did I." The days that followed were simple. Nora continued her work at the boarding house. Caleb took odd jobs around town. In the evenings they sat together talking about everything and nothing. Slowly the whispers faded. People stopped staring. They became just another part of the town's rhythm. One evening as they sat watching the sunset, Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a ring, simple and unadorned. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "I want you to have it." Nora's breath caught. "Caleb, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet, but I want you to know that I'm serious. About this. About us." Tears filled her eyes. She took the ring, slipping it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I'm serious too," she whispered. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "Then that's enough." Winter came slowly, bringing cold winds and long nights. But inside Caleb's small house, there was warmth. Nora made curtains from old fabric. Caleb built shelves for her books. They cooked meals together, laughing when things burned. On Christmas Eve, they walked to the cemetery. Snow covered the ground, soft and white. They stood before the two graves side by side. "Merry Christmas, Samuel," Caleb said quietly. "Merry Christmas, Thomas," Nora added. They stood in silence, honoring the dead, grateful for the living. As they walked back, Caleb stopped. "I have something to tell you." Nora looked up at him. "What?" "I love you." The words hung in the cold air, simple and true. Nora's throat tightened. "I love you too." He kissed her then, soft and slow. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Let's go home," he said. Spring arrived with wildflowers and birdsong. The cemetery bloomed with color, life rising from death. Nora and Caleb stood at the altar of St. Michael's Church, the same church where Nora had first seen him, standing beside a casket alone. Now they stood together, hands clasped, eyes bright. The preacher spoke words of love and commitment. When he finished, Caleb leaned in and kissed Nora, gentle and reverent. The small crowd clapped. Mrs. Holt wiped her eyes. Even Mrs. Fletcher smiled. Outside the sun shone warm and bright. Nora looked up at Caleb, her heart full. "We made it," she said. "We did." They walked through the town together, past the coffee shop, past the boarding house, past the cemetery where their brothers lay at rest. At the edge of town they stopped. Before them stretched open plains, endless and free. "What do you think happens next?" Nora asked. Caleb smiled. "Whatever we want." She squeezed his hand. "Then let's make it good." They walked forward into the wide expanse, into a future they would write together. Behind them the town settled into evening. In the cemetery 2 graves stood side by side, marked and remembered. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between grief and joy, 2 broken hearts had found a way to heal. Not by forgetting, not by running, but by staying, by choosing, by loving through the pain until something beautiful grew from the ashes. Maybe that's what love was after all. Not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of someone willing to carry it with you. And in a small town with no name worth remembering, two people who had walked into the wrong funeral found exactly what they needed. Each other. And the end. If this story of survival, courage, and unexpected love touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Wild West Untold Love for more tales of redemption on the frontier. And if a moment or a feeling in this story stayed with you, we'd love to hear it in the comments below. Because sometimes the strongest souls are forged in the darkest places. And the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of kindness.